Beneath the frost-laced eaves of the ancient keep, a child's fevered breath hung like a fragile mist, defying the hearth's defiant glow. Nerys Vale moved through the shadowed underbelly of Blackthorn Citadel like a whisper forgotten by the wind. At 27, she was no stranger to the chill that seeped from the stone walls, carrying the bite of eternal winter from the northern peaks. The kitchens were her domain, a cavern of iron pots and flickering torchlight, where the air thickened with the scent of simmering broth and scorched herbs. Omegas like her were the unseen threads in the court's grand tapestry, dismissed as mere vessels for labor, their sense muted by years of rejection. Nerys had long since learned to fold her presence small, her dark hair bound in a practical braid, her woolen dress patched and faded against the perpetual gray of her existence. The citadel sprawled across jagged cliffs, its towers piercing a sky perpetually bruised by storm clouds. Snow eternal dusted the battlements, and the wind howled through arrow slits like the distant wail of lost wolves. Here, under the watchful eye of the moon goddess Selene, the Alpha King's court pulsed with intrigue. Nobles cloaked in furs of silver fox and ermine, their eyes sharp as daggers, bartering power amid feasts that mocked the starving wilds beyond. Nerys had been born to this world, marked as Omega from her first breath, her family scattered by a border skirmish that claimed her parents and left her to the kitchen's mercy. No mate had claimed her, no pack had elevated her. She was the ghost who stirred the pots, her hands calloused from endless toil, her heart a quiet ache wrapped in resilience. But tonight, as the moon swelled full above the frozen moors, something stirred in the stillness, a summons that pierced her isolation like a shard of ice. The royal nursery's messenger, a beta guard with a face etched by duty, had appeared at the kitchen door just after dusk. "The prince," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "He wastes. The healer's elixirs turn to ash in his mouth. Bring your plain fare. Perhaps the boy's fever will yield to simplicity." Prince Elowin Crow, heir to Alpha King Bastion, was 4 winters old, a fragile wisp of a child whose laughter had faded into silence months ago. Whispers slithered through the halls, a curse from the lunar wars or poison from rival packs eyeing the throne. The court physicians, adorned in robes of deep blue embroidered with silver crescents, had tried everything. Rare roots from the frost caverns, blood rites under the eclipse. Nothing stayed down. Elowin's body rebelled, his skin pallid as fresh snow, his eyes sunken pools reflecting a terror that clawed at Nerys's chest even from afar. She prepared the meal with trembling care, a simple porridge of oats and goat's milk warmed over the embers, infused with a pinch of wild thyme she'd gathered from the cliffside edges. No grand spices for royalty here, just the earth's honest warmth. As she carried the wooden bowl through the labyrinthine corridors, the castle's chill wrapped around her like a shroud. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. The air grew heavier, laced with the metallic tang of fear. Servants averted their eyes, nobles in passing chambers murmured of omens and the king's growing wrath. The nursery door creaked open to reveal a chamber bathed in the moon's pale intrusion through arched windows. Elowin lay in a cradle carved from ancient yew, his small frame swathed in linens embroidered with the crow sigil. A raven's wing unfurled against a stormy sky. Healers hovered like crows themselves, their faces gaunt, but it was the king who commanded the space. Bastion Crow, at 34, was a figure forged in the fires of battle. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with premature silver, his eyes a stormy gray that held the weight of a crown stained by blood. He stood by the window, arms crossed over a chest armored in black leather, the scent of pine and ironclad resolve emanating from him. Guilt shadowed his features. The boy was his only light since the queen's death in childbirth, a loss that had hollowed the king into a monarch of quiet ferocity. Nerys knelt at the bedside, her knees pressing into the fur-strewn rushes, and offered the bowl. The child stirred, his fever-glazed eyes flickering toward her. For the first time in weeks, he did not recoil. His tiny hand reached out, trembling, and latched onto the spoon she held. The porridge slipped past his lips, warm and unadorned, and he swallowed, not once, but steadily, his breaths evening, as her scent enveloped him. Soft meadows after rain, a balm against the lunar chaos raging in his veins. Bastian watched, unblinking, the firelight etching lines of astonishment across his face. The healers exchanged uneasy glances. One, an elder with a scar twisting his lip, muttered of coincidences. But Nerys felt it, a pull, instinctive and unwelcome, like the tide drawn to the moon. Elauwen's nightmares quieted under her touch, his whimpers fading into sleep. Yet as she rose to leave, the king's voice halted her, low and resonant as thunder over snowfields. "Stay," he commanded, not a plea but a decree laced with desperation. "Whatever you are to him, do not vanish into the shadows again." She met his gaze, her heart pounding against ribs chilled by exile's long embrace. In that moment, the citadel's wind seemed to still, as if the goddess herself leaned in, whispering of paths untrodden. Nerys was no longer just the kitchen's forgotten soul. She was the thread that might bind a dying prince to life, or unravel the court's fragile peace. The moon hung witness, its light pooling like spilled silver on the floor, illuminating the first fracture in her solitary world. Nerys lingered in the nursery's hush, the king's command echoing like a chain forged in the forge of necessity. The air was thick with the scent of smoldering cedar from the hearth, its flames licking shadows across tapestries woven with ravens in flight. Elauwen slept now, his chest rising in shallow rhythms steadied by her nearness. But the child's skin still burned beneath her palm. A fever that whispered of deeper poisons, lunar imbalances twisting through his veins like thorns. She should have slipped away at dawn, back to the kitchens where obscurity was her armor. Yet Bastian's gaze held her, not with the predatory hunger of lesser alphas, but with a quiet storm, gray eyes reflecting the moon's silvered descent. He paced the chamber's edge, his boots muffled on the wolf pelt rugs, each step a measured restraint against the weight of his crown. 34 winters had carved him into a monarch of unyielding lines, the broad jaw shadowed by stubble, the shoulders that bore the scars of border wars where he'd spilled blood to claim these frozen lands. But beneath the leather and steel, guilt coiled like smoke. The queen's death haunted him, her final breaths cursing him for a throne that demanded too much, leaving Elauwen as the fragile emblem of his failures. "You carry no title," he said at last, breaking the silence as the first gray light seeped through the frost-rimed panes. His voice was low, resonant, carrying the rumble of distant avalanches. "Yet he eats from your hand alone. Why?" Nerys's fingers tightened on the edge of the cradle, the wood smooth as bone under her touch. Fear prickled her skin, cold as the wind slipping through the arrow slits, carrying the howl of wolves from the moors below. She was no healer, no noble with ancient bloodlines tracing to Selene's priestesses. Her gift, if it could be called that, was a whisper, an instinctive balance she felt in the humors of the body, the ebb of lunar tides in the blood. It had saved scraps of life in the kitchens, a scullery boy pulled from fever's grip, a guard's wound knit by her poultices. But to speak of it here, in the heart of power, invited envy or worse, accusations of witchcraft, for the court's nobles profited from the endless cycle of illness, their alchemists peddling elixirs laced with dependency. "I am nothing," she murmured, her voice a thread in the vastness of the room. Curiosity warred with dread in her chest. His scent enveloped her, pine resin and forged iron, a alpha's dominance tempered by sorrow. It stirred something primal, a pull toward him that she shoved down, rationalizing it as the child's needs binding her. Omegas did not gaze upon kings without peril. Rejection had taught her that the sting of unanswered heats, the isolation of a pack that saw her as lesser. The porridge is plain. Perhaps his stomach rebels against finery. Bastian halted, turning to face her fully. The firelight caught the silver in his hair, casting his profile in gold and shadow, like a statue hewn from the mountains themselves. He stepped closer, not invading but assessing, his presence a gravitational force that made the air hum. "Do not lie to me, Nerys Vale. I sent truth in you, meadows after storm, untainted. Elawan." He quiets. His nightmares flee when you hum those old cradle songs from the cliffs. Her breath caught. She'd murmured them without thought, fragments from her mother's lips before the skirmish tore them apart, lullabies invoking Celine's mercy, weaving balance into chaotic blood. The connection unnerved her, instinctive as the moon's draw on the sea, yet she denied it, fear curling in her gut like frost. What if this was a trap, a noble's ploy to expose an Omega's hidden strength? The court whispered already, of curses on the air, of rivals like Lord Draven whose pack eyed the throne with venom, profiting from smuggled poisons that mimicked lunar afflictions. As if summoned by her unease, a knock shattered the intimacy. The door swung open to admit Lady Alara, the king's advisor, her fur-lined cloak swirling like a storm cloud. Tall and angular, with eyes like chipped obsidian, she was beta-born but wielded influence sharper than any claw. "Sire," she said, her tone honeyed venom. "The council awaits." And this? Kitchen drudge? Lingering past her use? Bastian's jaw tightened, a flicker of protectiveness flashing in his eyes as he placed himself between Nerys and the intruder. "She stays, until Elowen mends." Alara's gaze raked over Nerys, calculating, the air thickening with unspoken threats. The noble's murmur of omens, an Omega influencing the prince. It invites scandal. Lord Draven sends his regards and questions the heir's care. The words landed like blows, stirring the wind outside to a frantic whine against the stone. Nerys felt exposed, her braid loosening in the draft, strands catching the dawn's pale light. Curiosity burned now, mingling with fear. Why did the king defend her, this broken sovereign marked by loss? His guilt was palpable, a shadow that made his ethical core gleam. He'd warred not for glory, but to shield his pack, only to watch his mate fade, her blood staining the birthing sheets under a blood moon. "Leave us," Bastian commanded Alara, his voice steel wrapped in melancholy. She departed with a curt nod, but the damage lingered, the corridor echoing her retreating steps like fading weavos. He turned back to Nerissa, exhaustion etching deeper lines around his mouth. "They fear what they cannot control, but you steady him. And perhaps, in your presence, I remember mercy over might." His hand brushed the cradle's edge, inches from hers, the warmth of his skin a spark against the chill. The touch was accidental, yet it ignited a denied spark, her pulse quickening, rationalized as duty, not desire. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the moors in white silence, while the moon's echo lingered in the blood, promising revelations yet to unfold. Elowen stirred then, a soft whimper escaping his lips, and Nerys leaned in, her scent wrapping him once more. The king watched, the room's fire crackling like a vow unspoken. As the first threads of refuge wove between them, fragile, resisted, born of a child's need and a monarch's quiet desperation. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The days blurred into a fragile truce within the nursery's frost-veiled walls, where the hearth's fire fought a ceaseless war against the encroaching cold. Nerys's world had shrunk to this chamber, her steps tracing a rhythm between the cradle and the shadowed alcove the king had claimed as her makeshift vigil. Alaouin's fevers ebbed under her care, his small body yielding to the warmth of her touch, the steady cadence of her voice weaving through the nights like threads of moonlight on snow. Yet safety felt illusory, a thin pelt stretched over the abyss of the court's simmering malice. Bastien moved like a sentinel in the periphery, his presence a constant pressure against the chill, broad frame blocking drafts from the arrow slits, his gray eyes scanning the door as if expecting invasion. He spoke little at first, his words measured, laced with the melancholy of a man who had bartered his soul for a throne. The guilt that shadowed him was tangible, a scent of aged pine undercut by sorrow, born from the queen's bloodied end and the wars that had orphaned Pax in his name. He had chosen duty over mercy once, sealing borders with iron and blood under a merciless moon, only to watch his son's life flicker like a dying ember. Now, in Nerissa's quiet competence, he glimpsed redemption's faint outline, not as reward, but as a trial he dared not fail. She felt his gaze often, heavy as the winter wind, stirring instincts she buried deep. Her scent, that soft meadow after rain, mingled with his sharper edge, creating a harmony that unsettled her. It was the child's need that bound them, she told herself, rationalizing the pull as mere survival. Omegas like her did not dream of kings. Rejection had schooled her in solitude, the ache of heat's unmet a scar she wore beneath her woolen layers. Yet as she knelt by Alaouin, adjusting the linens embroidered with the raven sigil, her fingers brushed a small pendant at her throat, a silver crescent moon, her mother's last gift before the skirmish claimed her. It warmed against her skin now, humming faintly, as if attuned to the lunar tides she balanced in the boy's blood. The first crack in their refuge came at twilight, when the moon's pale disk crested the jagged peaks, casting silver veins across the stone floor. A clamor echoed from the corridors, boots on flagstone, voices sharp as splintered ice. The door burst open, admitting Lord Draven and a cadre of his betas, their furs reeking of musk and ambition. Draven was a rival etched in malice, lean and wolfish, his eyes yellowed by envy, his pack's lands bordering blackthorns in a perpetual snarl of contested borders. Whispers had long painted him as the architect of subtle poisons, elixirs that mimicked curses to weaken the throne while his alchemists grew fat on desperate nobles. "Sire," Draven drawled, his voice a silken blade, stepping forward with a bow that mocked fealty. His gaze slid to Nerisse, curled protectively by the cradle and curled in disdain. "The council demands audience. This persistence of a kitchen wench in royal quarters? It reeks of scandal. The prince's affliction spreads rumor like plague. Perhaps her touch carries the very taint." Bastien rose from his chair by the fire, his form uncoiling like a storm-gathering force. The air thickened, charged with alpha dominance, the room's shadows deepening as flames guttered in response. "You overstep, Draven. Nerissa Vale saves what your poisons cannot. Leave, before I remind you of the blood oaths that bind this citadel." Draven's betas shifted, hands twitching toward hilts, their scents flaring aggressive, iron and sour earth, a pack honed for betrayal. Nerissa's heart hammered, cold sweat prickling her spine. She pressed closer to Alaouin, who whimpered in his sleep, the boy's fever spiking at the discord. Her gift stirred unbidden, a subtle warmth in her veins, drawing on the moon's rhythm to soothe the chaos in his blood. But fear clawed at her. Expose it, and she became prey, her ability to balance lunar humors a threat to those who thrived on imbalance. The Lord laughed, low and venomous, circling the cradle like a predator scenting weakness. "Saves, or ensnares. My spies speak of old songs, Omega witchery. The nobles profit from true healers, not this refuse. Marry her off to the scullery if you must, but bind her not to the air." His hand darted out, as if to seize her arm, but Bastien was there in an instant, intercepting with a grip that cracked bone beneath fur-clad sleeve. touch her, and you touch the crown's wrath." The king's voice was thunder wrapped in ice, his eyes stormy gray, locking onto Draven's. Empathy flickered in that moment, not for the rival, but for the fragile life between them. Bastion's free hand hovered near Nerys, a shield unspoken, his body a barrier forged from years of ethical restraint. He had spilled blood for power, but never for cruelty. Now, defending her ignited a bond he had not sought, a quiet vow amid the peril. Draven recoiled, Betas dragging him back as the scuffle spilled into the corridor, Weavos rising from the guards, summoned by the fray. The door slammed shut, but the echo lingered, the wind outside whipping snow against the panes like furious spirits. Nerys trembled, her breath ragged, the pendant at her throat pulsing with residual heat. Eloin quieted under her palm, his nightmares fleeing as she hummed a fragment of the old lullaby, the melody a balm against the violence. Bastion turned to her, his chest heaving, a cut on his knuckles welling crimson against the pale light. He knelt, surprising her with the vulnerability in his posture, and offered a cloth from the table. "You did not flee," he murmured, voice roughened by the clash. "In the face of that, you stayed for him, for us." She met his gaze, the warmth of his proximity chasing the chill from her bones, stirring that denied connection deeper. Fear warred with curiosity, her rationalizations fraying like frost on glass. Where else would I go? The boy. He needs balance, as do we all, in this storm. Her words hung between them, philosophical undercurrents threading the air. What was strength, if not choosing protection over flight? The fire crackled, illuminating the blood on his hand, a symbolic stain mirroring the crown's burdens. He nodded, the melancholy in his eyes softening to something akin to alliance, the empathy between them solidifying into a tentative bond. Outside, the moon watched, its light pooling like liquid silver, while the citadel's winds howled a warning of trials yet to come. In that shared refuge, forged from confrontation, Nerys felt the first true stir of not just duty, but destiny's quiet claim. The moon's silver gaze pierced the nursery's arched windows like a blade of judgment, illuminating the cradle where Elawin twisted in the grip of a deeper affliction. Nerys knelt beside him, her palms pressed to his fevered brow, the silver crescent pendant at her throat thrumming with an insistent heat that matched the boy's erratic pulse. The confrontation with Draven lingered in the air like the metallic tang of blood. The wind outside lashing the citadel's walls with renewed fury, as if the northern wilds themselves sensed the fracture widening in the court's fragile order. Bastion stood sentinel by the door, his bandaged knuckles a stark reminder of the violence he'd unleashed for her sake, his gray eyes shadowed by the weight of unspoken oaths. Elowin's whimpers escalated into ragged cries, his small body arching against the linens, skin slick with sweat that gleamed like frost under the lunar light. The fever had returned with a vengeance, not the gentle ebb of before, but a storm of lunar chaos, his veins pulsing visibly beneath translucent flesh, the humors imbalanced as if poisoned moonlight coursed through him. Nerys's breath hitched, dread coiling in her chest like the cold draft seeping from the stone. She had soothed him through lesser tempests, her presence a quiet anchor, but this felt different, a deliberate unraveling, the taint of Draven's elixirs woven into the boy's blood, twisting Celine's rhythms into discord. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, her voice a cadence of meadow winds, drawing on instincts honed in the kitchen's shadows. Her hands trembled as she lifted the pendant, its crescent shape catching the moon's reflection, casting prismatic shards across Elowin's face. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen current, the scent of rain-soaked earth rising from her skin, mingling with the hearth's dying embers and the faint acrid bite of the poison's residue. Bastion stepped closer, his boots silent on the wolf-pelt rugs, concern etching deeper furrows into his brow. He had seen battles where alphas fell to lesser wounds, but this child's suffering carved at him like a traitor's blade, guilt from his queen's loss resurfacing in every labored breath. The boy's eyes fluttered open, glazed with terror, and locked onto hers. "It burns. The shadows chase me," he gasped, his tiny fists clenching the air as if grasping at phantoms. Nerys felt it then, a surge within her, not fear, but revelation, the gift she had always rationalized as mere intuition uncoiling like roots from frozen soil. It was the Pathfinder's mark, whispered in old tales of Omegas who balanced the moon's wild tides in the blood, mending what wars and betrayals rent asunder. Her mother's pendant had been no trinket. It was a conduit, attuned to Celine's phases, amplifying the harmony she could weave. Without thought, she pressed the silver crescent to Elowin's chest, her other hand cupping his face. The world narrowed to the rhythm between them, her steady heartbeat against his frantic one, the moon's light pooling like spilled mercury on the floor. Warmth bloomed from her core, flowing through her fingertips, a subtle glow, ethereal as aurora veils, threading into his veins. The poison recoiled, its dark tendrils visualized in her mind's eye as coiling serpents, dissolving under the lunar balance she imposed. Elowin's cries softened to sighs, his body relaxing as the humors realigned, the fever breaking in beads of sweat that cooled like morning dew. Bastion froze, his breath catching in the silence that followed. The fire's crackle the only sound save the distant howl of winds over the moors. He had witnessed rites in the Templos Lunaris, blood offerings under eclipses, but this was no ritual of sacrifice. It was pure, intimate, a quiet power blooming from the Omega he had dismissed as insignificant, her dark braid falling loose to frame a face alight with focused grace. The king's ethical core, tempered by years of melancholic duty, stirred with awe. He saw not witchcraft, but destiny's hand, the key to his son's survival and perhaps the crown's fractured legacy. Guilt twisted anew, not for his past choices, but for the blindness that had nearly cost them this. "Nerys," he murmured, kneeling beside her, his voice rough as gravel under snow, the warmth of his proximity chasing the chill from her limbs. His hand hovered near hers on the cradle's edge, not touching, but close enough to feel the residual hum of her gift. "What you have done, it is no simple mercy. The healers spoke of curses, but you unravel them. Celine's favor rests in you." She withdrew her hand slowly, the pendant cooling against her skin, exhaustion seeping into her bones like the winter's bite. Fear flickered in her eyes. Revelation brought peril, for her ability threatened the nobles' shadows, their profits from imbalance. Draven's incursion had been a warning. Now, exposed, she became the battlefield's center. Yet in Bastion's gaze, she saw no rejection, only a profound recognition, the Alpha's melancholy yielding to a quiet reverence. The connection between them deepened, resisted no longer by rationalizations of duty. It was a covenant forged in the moon's witness, her gift, the bridge between his broken throne and redemption's path. Elowin stirred, his eyes clear now, a faint smile curving his lips as he reached for her. "The shadows are gone. You chased them with light." The words hung poetic in the hush, the boy's innocence a balm against the court's encroaching storm. Outside, snow fell in heavy veils, blanketing the jagged cliffs while the moon climbed higher, its light etching symbols of rebirth on the stone walls, crescents mirroring her pendant, ravens in flight etched in frost. Bastion rose, pulling her gently to her feet, his touch lingering on her arm, a spark of fire in the cold. "You are the key, Nerys Vale. Not to convenience, but to what the crown has lost. Balance, true strength in compassion over conquest." His words carried the weight of philosophy. What was power if not yielding to destiny's call? The wind howled approval, Weavos echoing from the wilds, as the revelation settled between them, binding their fates in threads of silver and blood. In that moment, amid the hearth's glow and the moon's unyielding watch, Nerys felt the stir of renascimento, not as reward, but as the first true choice in a life of exile. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the council chamber loomed like a cavern hewn from the mountain's heart, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows where torchlight dared not reach. Frost clung to the iron chandeliers, dripping crystalline tears onto the long oak table, scarred by centuries of claw and blade. Nerys stood at the threshold, her woolen dress whispering against the flagstones, the silver crescent pendant heavy at her throat, a talisman now burdened with the weight of exposed truths. The moon's influence waned toward its dark phase outside, the windows rattling under gusts that carried the scent of impending blizzard, Weavos threading the night like lamentations from forgotten packs. Bastian had summoned her here, his hand firm on her elbow as they descended the spiral stairs from the nursery. Eloin's improved sleep, a fragile victory left in the healer's care. The king's resolve had hardened since her revelation, his gray eyes no longer veiled by melancholy, but sharpened by purpose. Yet guilt lingered in the set of his jaw, the echo of choices that had cost lives, borders redrawn in blood under merciless moons. He had built this citadel on ethical foundations, sparing the weak in wars where others reveled in slaughter. But Draven's shadow threatened to unravel it all. The rivals' poisons a betrayal that mirrored the queen's untimely end, whispers of tainted herbs in her final hours. The assembly turned as one, a sea of fur-clad nobles and betas, their faces illuminated by the hearth's roaring blaze at the chamber's far end. Lord Draven occupied the seat opposite the throne, his lean frame coiled like a serpent in winter coils, yellow eyes gleaming with calculated malice. Flanking him were his allies, Lord Thorn, whose pack controlled the Frost Cavern's rare minerals, and Lady Vesper, her obsidian gaze flicking to Nerys with the precision of a dagger's tip. The air thickened with scents, aggressive musk from Draven's betas, the sour tang of fear from lesser lords, and the undercurrent of avarice that profited from the court's endless ailments. Nerys's meadow essence cut through it, unbidden, stirring unease. She felt their stares like barbs, peeling back her layers of obscurity to reveal the Omega who balanced lunar humors, the Pathfinder whose gift could dismantle their empires of dependency. Bastian guided her to his side, his presence a bulwark against the chill seeping from the stone, but she sensed the tremor in his restraint, the ethical king torn between justice and the crown's survival. "The prince mends," he declared, his voice resonating like thunder over snowfields, silencing the murmurs. He placed a hand on the table, knuckles still bruised from the nursery skirmish, blood long dried but its stain symbolic, a reminder of violence he loathed yet wielded. "Not by your elixirs, Draven, nor the rites that line your coffers. By her, Nerys Vale, whose touch unravels the poisons you've sown." A gasp rippled through the chamber, the fire's flames leaping as if fed by outrage. Draven rose slowly, his smile a crescent of cruelty mirroring her pendant, though twisted in shadow. "Poisons? Accusations from a king grasping at ghosts, sire. The boy's affliction is lunar curse, as the old scrolls decree, imbalance only our alchemists can temper. This Omega? A convenience wed for show, but her gift reeks of heresy. Celine's priestesses were noble-born. What pack claims her blood? The kitchen's? She threatens the order we've bled to maintain." Nerys's pulse thundered in her ears, the wind outside howling in symphony with her inner storm. Fear clawed at her chest, cold as the draft curling around her ankles, but beneath it burned a deeper fire, the rejection of her past, the exiles that had forged her resilience. She had been cast aside before, by packs that deemed her scent too soft for mating. by healers who dismissed her poultices as peasant folly. Now, confronted by this web of traitors, her gift hummed in her veins, the pendant warming as if drawing strength from the moon's hidden phase. Freedom whispered to her, flee to the wilds, vanish into the snow-veiled forests where no crown could claim her. Yet Eloan's clear eyes, Bastion's quiet defense, pulled like gravity, demanding a choice, compassion's peril or solitude's hollow peace. Lady Vesper leaned forward, her voice silken venom. Marry her if desperation blinds you, but bind her power. The noble's trade sustains the borders. Illness keeps our enemies weak, our packs fed. An Omega Pathfinder? She could mend all, upend the wars we've won through calculated frailty. The words landed like blows, exposing the court's rot. Draven smuggled toxins, mimicking lunar taints to sell cures, his ambition a blade aimed at Bastion's throat since the queen's death, which some whispered he had hastened with tainted birthing herbs. Bastion's hand found hers under the table, a fleeting touch that sent warmth spiraling through her, his scent of pine and iron grounding her against the vertigo of revelation. Guilt etched his features deeper. The king who had chosen duty over love once, sealing his mate's fate in a throne room much like this, now faced the same crossroads. War or forgiveness? Spill Draven's blood and ignite civil strife, or pardon and risk the pack's fracture? His ethical core warred visibly, melancholy yielding to resolve as he rose, pulling her with him. Order built on suffering is no order at all. Nerys is no threat, she is salvation. What is strength, if not choosing mercy over the blade? Draven lunged then, betas surging forward in a blur of claws and snarls, the chamber erupting into chaos. Tables overturned, torches sputtering as bodies collided, the air filling with the coppery scent of blood and the crack of bone. Nerys recoiled, her back to the wall, the pendant flaring hot against her skin as she channeled her gift instinctively. Not to harm, but to soothe the fray's lunar frenzy, calming the aggressor's pulses with waves of balance. One beta faltered, eyes clearing from rage's haze. Another dropped his dagger, confusion etching his face. But Draven pressed on, aiming for Bastion with a hidden blade, his howl a traitor's cry echoing the winds. Bastion met him mid-stride, grappling in a dance of restrained fury, his larger frame pinning the rival against the hearth. Flames licked at their furs, casting infernal glows on faces twisted in primal contest. Nerys's heart fractured, love's pull toward this broken king, freedom's call to escape the bloodshed. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, her voice cutting through the din like moonlight on ice. Enough, mercy, not murder. The word hung, philosophical and visceral, as Bastion hesitated, blade at Draven's throat, blood trickling from a gash on his arm. The rival's eyes widened. Defiance cracking under the weight of her influence, the poison's architect glimpsing his own imbalance. The chamber stilled, breaths ragged, the fire's roar the only judge. Bastion's gaze met hers, stormy gray pleading for guidance. What choice would redeem them, or doom the pack to war's abyss? In that suspended breath, under the moon's veiled watch, Nerys chose, not flight, but the battlefield of forgiveness, her hand steady as she pressed the pendant to Draven's brow, unraveling the deeper taint in his blood. The wind outside fell silent, snow piling like a shroud, as the first threads of judgment wove toward rebirth or ruin. The chamber's chaos ebbed like a receding tide, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the hearth's acrid smoke, heavy in the air that still hummed from the fray's primal echoes. Nerys's hand trembled against Draven's brow, the silver crescent pendant searing her palm as it drew forth the rival's hidden poisons. Dark veins of imbalance threading through his blood like frost cracks in stone. His yellow eyes widened, not in fury, but in fractured clarity, the traitor's snarl softening to a gasp as lunar harmony flooded his veins, unraveling the avarice that had twisted him. The betas around him faltered, their aggressive sense dissipating into confusion, claws retracting as her gift rippled outward, a subtle wave calming the chamber's frenzy without a single drop more spilled. Bastian released his grip, stepping back with measured restraint, his chest heaving beneath the torn leather of his tunic, a gash on his arm weeping crimson that stained the flagstones like spilled wine under moonlight. His gray eyes met hers across the stunned assembly, stormy depths reflecting not triumph, but a profound ache. The king's ethical soul laid bare in the choice he had deferred to her mercy. Guilt shadowed him still, the weight of past wars where he had chosen the blade over forgiveness, borders forged in the blood of innocence under indifferent moons. Yet here, in the heart of betrayal's lair, he saw redemption's form, not in conquest, but in this Omega's quiet power, her compassion a forge that tempered his broken crown. Draven slumped to his knees, breath ragged, the firelight etching hollows in his face as the pendant's glow faded. "What sorcery is this?" he rasped, voice stripped of venom, his body shuddering as the lunar taint dissolved, leaving him exposed. A lord unmasked, his empire of elixirs crumbling under Celine's unyielding gaze. The nobles shifted uneasily, Lady Vesper's obsidian eyes narrowing, Lord Thorne's fur-clad shoulders tensing, their profits evaporating like mist before dawn. Whispers slithered through the frost-laced air. Heresy, salvation, the end of their shadowed trade. Nerys withdrew her hand, exhaustion coiling in her limbs like the winter's bite, the pendant cooling against her throat, its crescent shape a symbol now etched in every mind, the Pathfinder's mark balancing what power had rent asunder. She felt the chamber's stairs like barbs of ice, peeling away her exile's veil, but freedom's whisper had faded. In its place bloomed a deeper pull toward the king whose touch had grounded her in the storm. Rejection scars ached faintly, the kitchen's isolation, the pacts that had cast her aside as insignificant. Yet here, amid the ruin of judgment, rebirth stirred. Not as escape, but as union, a covenant born of sacrifice. Her heart pounded, visceral and raw, the wind outside falling to a hush as snow piled against the windows, blanketing the world in white absolution. Bastian turned to the assembly, his voice resonant as an avalanche's rumble, carrying the melancholy of a man reborn through loss. See what mercy yields. Draven's poisons end here, not with his blood, but with healing. Nerys Vale is no threat. She is the crown's conscience, the balance we've forsaken for thrones built on frailty. He extended his hand to her, palm upturned, the cut on his arm a stark emblem of the violence he had wielded and now renounced. The touch, when she accepted it, sent warmth spiraling through her veins, his pine and iron scent enveloping her like a cloak against the chill. It was no immediate blaze of passion, but a resisted flame finally kindled, rationalized no longer as duty, but accepted as destiny's quiet decree. Draven rose unsteadily, betas supporting him, his gaze flickering between defiance and dawning shame. The borders, the wars we sustained through weakness, he murmured, the words a confession dragged from thawed earth. Bastian nodded, the ethical core of him gleaming through the guilt, choosing not war's abyss, but the harder path of forgiveness. Exile, not death. Take your pack to the southern wilds, Draven. Mend what you've broken, or let the moon judge you further. The rival bowed, broken but alive, his departure a procession of shadows slipping into the corridors, the chamber emptying like a lung exhaling poison. Alone now with the dying fire and the moon's veiled light filtering through the blizzard's veil, Bastian drew Nerys close, his free hand brushing a loose strand from her braid, the gesture tender amid the tragedy's wake. "You chose us," he whispered, voice roughened by the night's toll, his breath warm against her temple. "Not for power, but for what strength truly is, compassion's blade, sharper than steel." Her pulse synced with his, the pendant humming faintly between them, a bridge from her hidden gift to his redeemed throne. Eloan's face flickered in her mind, the boy's clear eyes a promise kept, his nourishment from her hand, the first thread of this union. Outside, the storm broke, snow giving way to a clearing sky where the moon emerged, full and forgiving, its silver light pooling on the table like liquid covenant. Nerys leaned into him, the chill fleeing her bones, rebirth unfolding not as sacrifice alone, but as healing's embrace. Their marriage no longer convenience, but a vow forged in blood and moonlight, redeeming a crown stained by loss. The citadel's winds sighed approval, distant weavos rising in harmony, as the first true peace settled over Blackthorn, fragile yet unyielding. In the hearth's final glow, Bastian pressed his lips to her forehead, a seal on their shared path. "We rebuild together," he said, the words a philosophy etched in firelight. What was love, if not the choice to heal what destiny had fractured? Nerys nodded, her hand over his heart. Feeling its steady beat mirror the moon's eternal rhythm, the Omega's exile transformed into the Queen's quiet reign. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The citadel's great hall stood transformed under the moon's emergent gaze, its vaulted arches draped in banners of raven and crescent, the air alive with the scent of thawing earth and blooming nightshade, harbingers of spring's reluctant kiss upon the eternal winter. Nerys moved through the throng like a shadow given form, her hand clasped in Bastian's, the silver pendant at her throat pulsing with a warmth that echoed the hearth's renewed blaze. Weeks had passed since Draven's exile. The rivals' pack scattered to the southern wilds like ash on the wind, yet the court's whispers lingered, a subtle frost testing the fragile bloom of peace. Eloan thrived now, his laughter a melody that pierced the stone, his small frame rounded by the nourishment she provided, not just food, but the balance of lunar humors that her gift wove into every meal, every touch. She had chosen union over solitude, the decision settling in her bones like the first melt of snow, yet doubt gnawed at the edges, a quiet fear that her power, once hidden, now invited shadows deeper than Draven's. The nobles bowed lower these days, their eyes veiled in calculation, for her ability to mend the blood's chaos threatened not just their trades, but the very hierarchies that propped the throne. Bastian sensed it, his grip tightening as they approached the dais, his broad frame a shield against the chill that seeped from the high windows, where the moon climbed full once more, casting silver veins across the flagstones. At 34, he bore the crown with a lighter melancholy, the guilt of his queen's loss tempered by this covenant. Yet his ethical heart wrestled still. What price would redemption exact when love demanded sacrifice beyond the self? The ceremony unfolded in ritual hush, the high priestess of Selene, a elder with eyes like polished quartz, chanting invocations that wove through the air like smoke from sacred braziers. Torches flickered in iron sconces, their flames dancing shadows across assembled packs. The scents of fur and incense mingling with the metallic undercurrent of blood oaths yet to be sealed. Nerys's woolen dress had been replaced by silks of deep blue and silver, embroidered with crescents that mirrored her pendant, but the fabric felt foreign against her skin, a reminder of the exile she had shed. Her dark braid was unbound, hair cascading like midnight rivers, and as Bastian lifted her hand to his lips, his breath warm against her knuckles, she felt the resisted pull ignite fully, a connection no longer rationalized as duty to the child, but embraced as the moon's inexorable tide. Eloan watched from the front row, perched on a beta guard's knee, his 4-year-old eyes wide with wonder. The pallor of his ordeal faded to the flush of health. He clutched a wooden raven toy, its wings etched with her lullaby's rhythm, and when their vows echoed, "In blood and balance, I claim thee as mate, redeemer of crown and kin," the boy clapped, his voice piping clear, "Mama Nerys." The word pierced her, a balm to rejection's old wounds, the kitchen's isolation dissolving in the warmth of his gaze. Yet as the priestess drew the ritual blade, silver and curved like a moonsickle, Nerys's pulse quickened, the air thickening with the scent of impending storm, winds rattling the banners, distant howls rising from the moors as if the wilds mourned or celebrated. The final rite demanded sacrifice, a mingling of blood under the lunar witness to bind their humors eternally, her gift amplifying his resolve against the court's lingering poisons. Bastian extended his arm first, the blade slicing a shallow line across his palm, crimson welling like rubies in torchlight. He did not flinch, his stormy gray eyes locked on hers, the melancholy in them yielding to a profound peace. The king who had spilled rivers in war now offering this drop as covenant, proving love's trial through vulnerability. "For him," he murmured, "and for the pack we rebuild. What is a crown, if not forged in shared mercy?" Nerys hesitated, the blade's edge cold against her skin, fear coiling like frost in her chest. Her gift had cured Alawan, unraveled Draven's taint, but this union meant surrender. Her freedom bartered for the throne's healing. Her pathfinder essence no longer solitary, but entwined with a monarch's burdens. Whispers stirred from the edges, a noble's sidelong glance, Lady Vesper's betakin, murmuring of imbalance restored too swiftly, threats of relapse if her power waned. Sacrifice loomed, not death but the erasure of self, the Omega's quiet strength bent to royal will. Yet in Bastian's gaze she saw no domination, only the ethical plea of a broken soul, redemption not as reward but as the choice to heal together, compassion over isolation's hollow throne. She pressed the blade to her palm, the sting sharp as winter's bite, blood flowing to meet his in the ceremonial chalice. The priestess intoned the binding, their mingled essence glowing faintly under the moon's beam, a ethereal light that rippled through the hall, soothing latent fevers in the assembly, guards straightening, nobles exhaling tensions long held. The pendant flared hot, channeling the harmony, and Nerys felt it. The cure complete, not just for Elowen, but for the citadel's poisoned veins, her gift a river now flowing freely, washing away the court's rot. Pain ebbed into warmth, Bastian's hand enveloping hers, their blood sealing the union in a pulse that synced like heartbeats under one skin. The hall erupted in cautious applause, Weavos echoing from the battlements, the wind outside shifting to a gentle sigh as snow gave way to starlit clarity. Alawan rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her legs, his scent, innocent meadows laced with pine, a promise fulfilled. Bastian drew her close, his lips brushing hers in a kiss born of fire and frost. Tender amid the tragedy's echo, the love accepted fully now, a rebirth from exile's ashes. "We are whole," he whispered against her mouth, voice resonant with quiet ferocity, the guilt in his eyes transformed to light. Nerys leaned into him, the moon's silver pooling at their feet like a crown of liquid grace, her heart no longer aching in solitude, but beating in covenant's rhythm. What was destiny, if not the freedom to choose healing over chains? In the hearth's triumphant roar, as the packs pledged fealty anew, Nerys glimpsed the Renascimento, a queen not by birth, but by the moral fire she had kindled, the Omega's rejection alchemized into the realm's enduring balance. The winds carried their vow outward to the frozen peaks and shadowed vales where redemption's flame would burn eternal. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.